Hello ladies and gentlemen, Spirit of the Law here. Today's mathematical Age of Empires question is, how much is a villager worth? Well, 50 food, right? That was easy, that's what they cost, so that's how much they're worth. Well, it's actually a little bit more complicated than that. I can rephrase it for you. What we really want to know is how much is it worth to kill one of your opponent's villagers. If I send 3 militia in the Dark Age and I only kill 1 villager, was it worth it? Those militia cost 180 food and 60 gold versus 50 food for the cost of the villager. That seems like a pretty bad deal. But the opponent actually loses out on a lot more than just the villager's cost. They lose out on all the gathering that villager can do. Well, how much is that worth? Does it change if we're talking about the feudal age or the imperial age? Well, let's look at it from a mathematical perspective and I'll tell you exactly how much a villager is really worth. So generally, if you send 3 militia in the Dark Age and you kill 1 villager, that's actually considered a successful Dark Age rush. Therefore, villagers must be valued more than just that 50 food. So the most obvious way to try to find the villager's worth is to determine how much the villager would have collected over its whole life had it not just been killed. So that's a pretty easy calculation. All we need is the rate of their collection and the life expectancy of a villager, so to speak. For example, we might say a villager in the Dark Age can expect to live maybe 1 hour in-game. Games on average probably end around an hour or just beyond that. So we can multiply the collection rate, which is actually easier said than done since it changes per age, and we'll just assume there's no economy upgrades here. And we multiply that by that 1 hour that a Dark Age villager can expect to live, and what do we get? Well, we actually get a really, really big number. So if you take the food collection rate at a farm for 1 hour, it ends up being 1,086 food for a farm that's well placed beside the town center. Likewise, if instead of being on farm, that the villager was on wood, that ends up being 1,340 wood, or 1,330 gold, or 1,290 stone, or some combination of those. It's actually way more than that because the double bit axe alone increases the wood gathering by 20%, as well as the other bonuses that happen with those other ones. So it's actually way more, and they're worth even more than 1,000 resource each. That doesn't sound right. That would imply that it's a good deal at 30 minutes in the game to send in 6 light cavalry or scout cavalry, which costs 480 food, and to kill 1 farming villager that's expected to collect over 500 more food over the course of the game. I don't think 6 light cavalry are worth 1 villager. Maybe there's something else going on here, and maybe it's because villagers aren't really worth everything that they're going to collect over the rest of their life in the game, so to speak. Okay, so new plan. Can we agree that villagers aren't worth what they collect, but they also aren't worth 50 food? In the Imperial Age, if you lose a villager, is it really a problem? Usually population limit is what determines when you stop making villagers. Usually stop at about half of the total population that you have in the game to make the other half military and trade cards, etc. So losing a villager in the Imperial Age costs you basically 50 food plus whatever that villager could have gathered in the time that it takes you to make a new villager. We can basically agree that's 50 food. Does this make sense? If you have 150 villagers and one of them dies in the Imperial Age, you just tell your town center to make 1 more. You really haven't lost out on all that much. In fact, I would argue that after about 25 minutes in-game, you have enough town centers going that villagers are pretty easily replaced. So maybe we'll say villagers after 25 minutes are worth about 50 food, or maybe a little bit more. This is simplifying a little bit, but it gets at the question that we really want to know, which is how much is it worth to kill one of your opponent's villagers? If you're exchanging 2 knights, which are 120 food and 150 gold, for a villager when everyone is in the castle age, that doesn't really feel like a great exchange, even if that villager was going to collect hundreds of resources, because the opponent can just produce a new villager right away at a far lower cost than 2 knights. Hopefully I've convinced you that early in the game, villagers are worth more than they are later in the game. Okay, so now let's try to find out how much more they're worth. What we want to do is combine the ideas we've talked about already. Instead of saying villagers are worth 50 food, or that they're worth their entire collection lifespan, we want to say that they're worth 50 food plus whatever they would have collected before 25 minutes in the game. After which we'll say they're replaceable to a degree, or at least they're worth only a little bit more than that 50 food cost. So if we start to try that calculation and see what we get and see if it sounds reasonable, this would imply that a villager that's killed at 20 minutes in the game, so if you press F11, you have the timer in the top left hand corner, I'm talking about that 20 minutes. If the villager dies at 20 minutes in the game, it's worth the 50 food that it costs to make the villager, plus 5 minutes of gathering time, before our semi-arbitrary but necessary cutoff at 25 minutes. In 5 minutes, a villager with no economic upgrades can collect 90 food, 112 wood, or 112 gold. If we just look at the food to simplify things, we say that's 50 food plus the 90 food that it will collect in the next 5 minutes. So a villager that is killed at 20 minutes into the game is worth 140 food, maybe a little bit more because of economic upgrades, but we'll say about 140 food in total. A villager killed at 15 minutes is worth 50 food plus 10 minutes of gathering time before that 25-minute cutoff. That would make it 180 food, 224 wood, or 224 gold, or we could say 230 food in total. That 230 again comes from the 50 food that the villager costs to make and the 180 food that it could have collected between the 15-minute mark and the 25-minute cutoff. Okay, so a villager killed at 10 minutes is worth 50 food plus 15 minutes of gathering time. That actually ends up being about 320 food. So you can see that these numbers are getting bigger and bigger as we go backwards. I'll let Jordy explain.
The effects would travel backwards through the space-time continuum.
Yes, that's why it gets larger in the past. It grows as it travels backwards in time.
All right. Just for the moment, let's say that you're right. What do we do?
Well, Riker, that means that an early rush that kills villagers is going to have more effect than attacking later. So it seems that when 3 militia are exchanged for 1 villager, that is a good exchange in the long run. Okay, so I'll try to explain that exchange in a little bit more detail. If we're looking at the militia, that 60 gold that they cost would take about the same amount of time as to collect 49 food. So we consider that cost as being added to the 148 food that the militia costs. That means that the 3 militia basically costs you 229 food. Now I know the 50 gold is free at the start, but the point is you'd have to sacrifice producing 49 food by putting a villager over onto gold if you wanted to get that 60 gold back. Exact numbers aren't the important part here. The main point is that killing the villager early in the game is a much better deal than waiting, so investing in a rush pays off if you do it fast and you kill villagers. Obviously there's extra bonuses like kicking villagers off production and disorienting your opponent, and those are added benefits as well. Just looking at the cost analysis here, it's costing you the equivalent of 229 food to send in your Dark Age rush, and if you kill 1 villager, you're costing them 320 food. Okay, so let's continue going backwards in the game. So a villager killed at 5 minutes, maybe died to a boar from a failed boar lure or something, is worth its 50 food plus 20 minutes of gathering. In 20 minutes, a villager can gather, completely unupgraded, 360 food, 336 wood, or 336 gold, or we could say about 410 food. So that's a pretty big mistake when that actually happens and you lose a villager. Finally, one of your starting villagers, well, what are they worth? They're worth the 50 food that it costs to replace them, as well as 25 minutes of gathering time. In 25 minutes, they can gather 450 food, 448 wood, or 448 gold. Or we could say those villagers you start with are worth 500 food in the long run. The starting villagers are very valuable. They're going to be collecting for a really long time before you would consider them replaceable in the game. So again, don't get hung up on specific numbers here or decisions that I've made in how to weight things. The overall trend is going to remain the same, even if we take lost gathering during villager creation time into account and assume that villagers are collecting things besides food. Doesn't really matter. The opening question of how much is a villager worth really comes down to what time in the game are we talking about, but that it's going to be between 50 food and 500 food depending on how late we're talking. So this graph I'm putting up shows the relationship that I described. The red line represents the calculation that I've explained, whereas the blue one probably better represents what's really going on if we took everything into consideration. The point with the red line, as you can see where it just suddenly flattens out, that's the 25-minute mark. That is semi-arbitrary, but that is when you're starting to put up multiple town centers and villagers become much easier to replace. So hopefully you learned something, maybe it made you think. If you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing for more similar videos in the future, and feel free to leave a comment of any other mathematical questions that you'd like answered. Thanks for watching, I'm Spirit of the Law, and we'll see you next time.